We have the opportunity to make a habit of empathy.
Discriminated against because she didn't file in a timely manner. Is my summation there accurate? You want to elaborate?
Yes, in terms of the part of the claim that we held was barred by the statute of limitations. In a response to the earlier question, I indicated that the law requires some finality, and that's why Congress passes or state legislature passes statutes of limitations that require people to bring their claims within certain time frames. Those are statutes, and they must be followed if they apply to a particular situation.
Finally, let's look at a case that cuts the other way with a pretty repugnant litigant. This is the case called Pappas versus Giuliani. And you considered claims of a police employee who was fired for distributing terribly bigoted and racist materials. First, what did you think of the speech in question that this officer was distributing?
Nobody, including the police officer, was claiming that the speech wasn't offensive, racist, and insulting. There was a question about what his purpose was in sending the letter, but my dissent in that case, pointed out that offensiveness and racism of the letter, but I issued a dissent from the majority's affirmance of his dismissal from the police department because of those letters.
Right. As I understand it, you wrote that what the actual literature that the police officer was distributing was, quote, patently offensive, hateful, and insulting. But you also noted that, quote, and this is your words in a dissent where the majority was on the other side, quote, 3 decades of jurisprudence and the centrality of First Amendment freedoms in our lives, that's your quote, the employee's right to speech had to be respected.
In the situation of that case, that was the position that I took because that's what I believe the law commanded.
Even though obviously you wouldn't have much sympathy or empathy for this officer or his actions. Is that correct?
I don't think anyone has sympathy for what was undisputedly a racist statement, but the First Amendment commands that we respect people's rights to engage in hateful speech.
Right. Now I'm just going to go to a group of cases here rather than one individual case. We could do this all day long, where sympathy, empathy would be on one side, but you found rule of law on the other side, and you sided with rule of law. Right. The only point I'm making here, if some are seeking to suggest that your empathy or sympathy overrules rule of law, this is a pretty good body of law to look at. A, it's a lot of cases, 850. B, one would think, I'm not going to ask you to state it, that you'll have sympathy for immigrants and immigration. And third, there is some degree of flexibility here, as Judge Newman said, just because of the way the law is. And yet you are exactly in the middle of the Second Circuit. If empathy were governing you, I don't think you would have ended up in that position. But I'll let everybody judge whether that's true. But the bottom line here, in the air crash case, in Washington, in Boykin, in this whole mass of asylum cases, you probably had sympathy for many of the litigants, if not all of them, ruled against them. The cases we've just discussed are just a sampling of your lengthy record, but they do an effective job of illustrating the fact that in your courtroom, rule of law always triumphs. And would you agree? I mean, that seems to me, looking at your record, you know it much better than I do, that rule of law triumphing probably best characterizes your record as your 17 years as a judge.
I firmly believe in the fidelity to the law. In every case I approach, I start from that working proposition and apply the law to the facts before me.
Right. And has there ever been a case in which you ruled in favor of a litigant simply because you were sympathetic to their plight, even if rule of law might not have led you in that direction?
Never.
Thank you.